Good afternoon and welcome to CompanyRoots. Today we're interviewing Professor Matthew Bidwell, an associate professor of management at the Wharton School, whose research examines new patterns in work and employment. Professor Bidwell looks specifically into the causes and effects of employment relationships using people analytics with work on industry contractors and career mobility.
Professor Bidwell's work has been featured in the New York Times and Wall Street Journal, and he is a recipient of Wharton's Teaching Excellence Award in 2020. It's a privilege, and we are truly honored to interview you today. My name is Suresh Jasti. I'm a rising freshman at the Wharton School, and I'm from Homedale, New Jersey.
And my name is Raul Kavoru. I'm a junior at St. Paul School in New Hampshire, and I'm the president of CompanyRoots. And the first question that we always ask in the interview are, what are your company roots and how do they help you in shaping your ideas and becoming the person you are today?
Well, since I don't have a company, I'm not sure what my company roots are. But my roots is funny. I went to a school called St. Paul's as well, but not in New Hampshire, back in the UK. So I came from the UK, got quite I often say broad rather than deep, at least for an academic. So my undergraduate major was actually in chemistry. I studied that, came to the US to do a master's in political science, which was fun, just doing something different for a year before starting work. I spent a couple of years as a management consultant at McKinsey. Basically reached two conclusions. Working is hard. Maybe studying other people working might be easier. So I went off and I did a PhD at MIT in those days it was industrial relations and human resource management. I think the real reason why I wanted to do a PhD, when I was working as a consultant, a lot of what you did as a consultant, particularly as a junior consultant, was fairly standard stuff, compiling numbers. There wasn't putting together nice spreadsheets and PowerPoints, but it didn't seem that intellectually demanding or interesting. And it did seem like the people who had the most interesting jobs around me that I saw at the time were the people who weren't just kind of, general skills, I can do Excel, but were people who had real deep expertise in some area. At that time, so this was the late 90s, which I realize is, Jesus, before you were born. But it was the time of the first dot-com bubble. And those people who were beginning to understand e-commerce and those sorts of things, they were just in demand. People were coming to them to ask them, well, what do you think? Help us with this. In a way that you saw for kind of most general consultants, it was just like, follow this methodology and arrive at this. And I thought that looked really cool. I wanted to be that person that people come to saying, we don't understand, tell us about it. And so I thought doing a PhD would be a good route to building that deep expertise. And I was and am just fascinated by work. I don't actually like doing it myself, but I'm very interested in how other people do it. And just for most of us, I think partly employment's where our money comes from. It's how we spend all our time. People who are employees, particularly of large organizations, create most of the world's goods and services. So it's the fundamental relationship at the heart of society. And so it just seemed really important to me. And I figured if you're going to study something, if you're going to become an expert in something, better be something you find important. And that employment relationship is the thing I thought was thoroughly important. So that's what got me to where I am now.
Definitely.
For better or worse.
One of the things that I wanted to kind of further talk to you about was one of your studies called After the End, Entrepreneurship as a Step in Your Career Path. And something that was particularly interesting to me as like an entrepreneur myself was how your conclusion was that, I believe it was that people who are entrepreneurs or like founders of a company generally have like more managerial positions and higher positions in a company, and they probably have more mobility. But do you think you could expand on what your thoughts from the study were and anything that you really realized from doing that?
Yeah, just trying to remember it. So to try and understand this, so we did a survey of the MBAs who graduated Wharton. So we basically surveyed all of our alumni. And some of them responded, a decent number responded. And we asked them a bunch of questions about being entrepreneurs. I think, struggling to remember the numbers, but I think, of the order of a quarter to a third of our MBA alums have been involved in founding a company within their first kind of 20 years after graduation. So a lot of them become entrepreneurs. And so it was a neat place to look at what happens with entrepreneurship. I think, one place we started was just, there can be the sense of you're either an entrepreneur or not an entrepreneur. And kind of founding this company as this thing, and you then just move into this entrepreneurship. Well, you do, but then generally you move back, right? So most people who become entrepreneurs will spend some time as entrepreneurs, and most of them will ultimately move back into employment. And, when you think about entrepreneurship that way, it raises this interesting question of, what does it do for my future prospects? I might think about whether I want to be an entrepreneur now, but how's that going to position me 10 years down the road? And so kind of we think particularly, two people doing pretty similar things. One of them goes off to be an entrepreneur, the other one goes to do something else. What does that mean for where they go later? And we do find it, if people get jobs after entrepreneurship, they tend to get different kinds of jobs. So entrepreneurship, it develops skills like anything else. The skills that it tends to develop are those of kind of, generalist managerial rather than kind of narrow specialist. It also, the people who tend to go into entrepreneurship like small organizational settings, and they probably tend to have the skills for those. Getting something done in a 10-person organization requires a very different set of skills to getting something done in a 10,000-person organization. To do it in a 10,000-person organization, you really have to understand how to manage the processes, how to manage the politics, how bureaucracy works, how to lobby effectively, and all those sorts of things. What you don't need to understand is how to do everything yourself. Getting something done in a 10-person organization, you've got to know how to go to local Staples, pick up the copy paper. There's a whole infrastructure that you're lacking that you take for granted in a large organization. And so, if you've been an entrepreneur, your experiences, your behavior, and all those sorts of things tend to suit you better for life in small organizations. So it does appear to switch people towards different kind of career paths. And so what I say to people is, if your dream job is to be vice president of marketing in a large firm, maybe entrepreneurship is not for you, right? If your dream job is to be general manager of a 100-person organization or something, then entrepreneurship is probably quite good preparation for that.
Right. Do you think that the findings that you found in the study should affect how a business school or really any university operates to their curriculum?
I don't think that study in particular. I think what you see in most business schools is a reasonable amount of flexibility in terms of, you can either go very deep, I'm just going to take finance classes. Much more sensibly, I'm just going to take management classes. I teach in the management department. But, or you can say, I want to take a variety of courses and just understand a little bit about lots of different areas. There's a famous study by a professor at Stanford, who actually sadly just passed away, where a guy called Eddie Lazier, who looked at courses taken by their MBAs and then looked at what happened to them and found that people who became entrepreneurs tended to have taken a much broader set of classes. So again, if I want to be that marketing specialist, I don't want to be an entrepreneur, because if I'm an entrepreneur, I get to think about marketing, but I've also got to think about operations, manufacturing, logistics. I've got to think about how to manage my workforce. I've got to think about cash flow, et cetera, et cetera. Right. Those people don't become entrepreneurs. It's the person who likes the idea of understanding it all and integrating it all. So there is a sense, I guess less with business schools, but there does seem to be a sense, if you want to be an entrepreneur, you're not going deep by and large. You are broadening you, so I can understand how to oversee all parts of this company rather than just focus on one thing.
Right. And what I'm seeing now is a lot of people make decisions about what paths they want to go into depending on that path's career mobility. And so how would you say firms find the balance in filling the jobs between both external job candidates and both internal job candidates?
That's a good question. It varies. I think in practice, I mean, there seems to be a big insider advantage. And so kind of if you think about, I've got a role to fill, do I want to try and promote somebody or move somebody sideways inside the organization who could do it? Or do I want to hire somebody from outside? Certainly, we did a whole bunch of interviews around this, and I've actually talked to a lot of executives about it. I think if you've got somebody you know can do the job, they're your first choice. And that person you know can do the job is always somebody inside the organization, just because you know so much less about being outside. And so, I think that's the fundamental driver. There's always this question about how having somebody who knows the job, where that comes from, right? And so you see some organizations are going to say, look, we need to be able to do this. We prefer to be able to fill jobs from inside because people know the organization, we know them, it's much less risky. And because of that, we're actually going to really invest in developing people. And so the reason we're able to fill jobs from inside is we've thought about this 2-3 years ahead. We've made sure that people are developing the skills that will enable them to move up, that will make them good candidates. You see other organizations that are less wedded to that idea, that kind of think, well, we don't know what kind of jobs we're going to need. So, I could invest a lot in developing people, but then I might be developing them for jobs that aren't even going to exist. So I'm not going to develop that much. I'm going to wait to see what I need. In that case, I'm probably much less likely to have a successful candidate internally, and I'm going to hire, and that's cool. And I think some people, what they see as the advantage of hiring from outside is that you are bringing in new ideas, you are bringing in new knowledge. Based on my research, I tend to be a bit skeptical about that. There are a lot of ways to learn. And I think the cost of that is you're bringing in somebody with new knowledge, but maybe is less effective at actually applying that knowledge inside your organization. My research has tended to find that when you bring somebody in from outside, you have to pay more for them, and their performance tends to be lower than somebody promoted from inside. But it does offer you more flexibility. And I think particularly organizations tend not to be very good at investing for the long term, right? In order to be developing people for the future, I'm having to devote time and resources today to their development rather than just getting work out of them. And often, as an organization, I'm not that excited about it. As a manager trying to hit my goals and my targets for this quarter, that's not high on my priority list. And so I think it's easy to fall into this default of, we're not going to do a great deal of development, and because of that, we're going to end up going outside for a lot of our staffing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You also believe that the person who's most likely to take a chance on you is somebody who knows you very well. So can you elaborate on this idea and why you feel this way?
Yeah, so this comes from actually the same survey that we did of our MBA alumni. One of the questions that we looked at is, so when I start a job, that's kind of me thinking about how do I move people into it. Obviously, if it's my career, that's the flip side of that. It's me thinking about which job I'm going to take next and applying for it and so on. So we basically looked at how people's job changed when they moved jobs inside companies and when they moved jobs between companies. So do I tend to do better moving internally or externally? We actually found the increase in pay was fairly similar for internal and external moves. But when we looked at change in responsibility, we found that those people who moved internally were much more likely to get an increase in title and much more likely to get an increase in the number of people that they manage. And our logic for this is very much around that. The only way to really know how well you're going to do in a job is if you've done it before, right? And so if I don't know very much about you, I want to put you in a job that you've already done before, right? If, on the other hand, I've seen you do another job and you've done it extremely well, I'm going to be more confident that you're ready for that next step up. But I never have that confidence if I haven't worked with you. And so if you've done a lower level job somewhere else, I don't know how you've done it. I don't know what skills you have. I can interview you, but we know that's messy. And so I'm going to be much less likely to take that chance of elevating you. So that's kind of what we mean. It's like, it's a big risk to take somebody from something into something they haven't done before with more responsibility.
Right.
You're only going to do that if you have reasons to believe that they're prepared to handle those greater responsibilities. And that means you actually need to know them pretty well.
Yeah. And so in both like workers and students, are there any common traits that you have analyzed and recognized in the most successful individuals who are really able to climb the career mobility ladder?
That's a great question. It's not an area that I've done a great deal of research on. Yeah, I can tell you broadly. I mean, the two things, so people have looked at this a lot in the context of hiring. So when we hire people, what predicts how well they're going to do in their job? Two things that really stand out is intelligence. To the extent to which you look at the numbers and think kind of intelligence is weirdly predictive. You know, if you want to know one thing about somebody, you know, everybody talks about emotional intelligence and all that sort of stuff. Actually does a terrible job of predicting performance in most roles. Actual kind of intellectual intelligence, kind of across roles, because, you know, speaks to your ability to learn and stuff, is a great predictor. Personality-wise, people talk, I don't know if you've heard this phrase, the big five. People talk about 5 facets of personality that tend to differentiate people.
Mm-hmm.
I can do them. Openness to new ideas and new experiences, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and emotionality.
Right.
Which one do you think best predicts performance in jobs, kind of general success in life?
I think perhaps extrovertedness, being able to like seize opportunities, maybe.
Right. I would think consciousness, because I feel like it's kind of, you have to know your place in the organization and know how to kind of network.
Yeah, I mean, so it turns out, so you're right. Conscientiousness is kind of the best predictor. It's not a fabulous predictor, but it's better than any of the others. And so, you know, because conscientiousness is somebody who meets their commitments, basically. Somebody who says they're going to do something and then does it.
Right.
That's something you really want in somebody. The only other piece that I remember, random thing, somebody did a study of CEOs and their personalities, and looked at which CEOs were more successful. And the piece that really stood out for me is that the really successful CEOs had high levels of physical energy. You know, and so I think you need to be smart, you need to be driven. There are a lot of people who are like that. The ones that can keep going that little bit longer than everybody else, they have an advantage.
Definitely. Like the people who take the extra step are always the ones that you see in the long run, just making like the next biggest thing, or just differentiating themselves in the pack.
Yeah. I mean, obviously luck is tremendously important as well.
Right. And so as a director of Wharton People Analytics and a former employee at McKinsey & Company, what advice would you give to those who are looking to gather the right data to make better decisions about people for who they are to ultimately impact those organizations?
Gather data, really. I mean, I think the main thing is, I think particularly when we make decisions about managing people, we tend to do them on gut feel. We tend to do them on kind of rules of thumb and best practice. And we rarely stop to kind of say, okay, what's really worked in the past? Mm-hmm. So just having the discipline and spending the time to go back, you know, whenever we're making a decision about people, what does the data say? Collecting data, trying to understand it. That's the big one. I mean, there's, you know, all sorts of details you can get into for each question about, you know, is this the right kind of data, and treating the data carefully, and how do you deal with issues of privacy and confidentiality. I mean, there's a lot of detail that goes into it. Mm-hmm. But I think just kind of thinking through for any decision we're making, is there any data that would help us shed light on what decision we should be making, help us think about what we would want to know to help us make that decision, and then go out, collect it. That's
Right.
step one.
Yeah, the biggest thing is like planning to get the right data, and not just spending time getting like data that's not going to help at all.
Yeah.
One of the things, like just what I'm piecing together from, how what you're saying is physical energy, data driven, being conscientious about the work you're doing. Those are like some of the characteristics that make a good CEO. Kind of distinguishing what you mean by physical energy, I immediately thought of Jack Ma and how people said he's very theatrical. Like he's like, a drama person. He goes on the stage and he gives a speech and he inspires people, compared to, some other people who might not be so extroverted as him. Do you think that being a good CEO means you have to be dramatic to a sense while also being, able to integrate different parts? Or do you think it just means you have to be able to know what everybody in the organization is doing and just be a good manager?
It's not an area of expertise for me, but I'm going to speculate anyway. I think it's hard to pin down, here's one thing you need to do as a CEO. I think there are a variety of different types. There are people who are great frontmen, who are great at kind of, selling, creating the vision for the company, getting people to buy in. I was just reading over the vacation the biography of Adam Newman, the founder of WeWork. That's not a story that ended very happily for the company, but he was a tremendous salesperson, and that did him very well. And arguably, kind of under some different scenarios, they could have continued to do quite well if they hadn't been kind of pushed for so much growth. There are some CEO, and so if you have somebody like that with a COO who is details oriented, that could be a fabulous combination. There are other CEOs who are really into the details and kind of know what's going on in the organization and can push it forward. So, I don't think there's one profile that makes success. There's probably something to be said for knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and both crafting your job in ways that plays to your strengths and finding ways to cover the areas you're less good at.
Got it. And also, let's assume a Wharton freshman comes in and is interested in entrepreneurship and the management side of it, while being less, detail oriented in terms of like statistics or finance. How would you recommend somebody like that move in through a business school, such as Wharton or any of the other ones, compared to someone who is more quantitatively oriented?
I think there's something to be said for just taking the classes, right? So I think, first couple of years, there's always there's a bunch of cool classes. Got to take them all seriously. Again, just because I'm not great at everything doesn't mean I don't want to try and understand it. After a while, you want to, there's always a bit of a trade-off between here's what I enjoy and here's what I need to be good at to get where I'm going. I know for myself, when I was in high school and in college, I didn't love the quantitative subjects, but I knew I was kind of interested in parts of them, so I knew I just had to suck it up and do them. And that actually ended up being a tremendous advantage for me. When I moved into studying an area that I ended up caring about a lot more, the fact that I had just been drilled in so many quantitative problems and quantitative exercises just gave me a facility that I wouldn't have had anyway. So there's a lot of things that you do because you don't love them, but ultimately they're going to be useful in the long run.
Right. And so at Wharton, you currently teach people analytics and understanding careers. So were there any just very memorable and personal experiences that you had with some of your students who embodied those CEO-like qualities?
Ooh, great question. There's, don't say every class is memorable and personal, but I can't remember any of them, but that would be a bit of a, there's, every year there are a few students who stand out, I think, not necessarily because they're more capable than the others, but just because they engage the material more. And that's always very fun for me. I enjoy teaching both of those classes a great deal. They're very different. So one class is much more about kind of mastering skills. And the other is, about thinking what could happen to me and what do I want to happen to me as I go forward. One of the things I enjoy in the careers class particularly is I get the students to write down what's the next 20 years going to be like. If you think about the next 20 years looking back, write that down for me. And it's always interesting to read those and just get a sense of what is it what do people want to be, what do they want to do, and just understand how are people thinking about their lives and what's ahead of them. So that, I think, you look at it, sometimes you think, wow, that's never going to happen. Sometimes you think, I'm not sure you really get this, but just understanding like what do we want out of life? And sometimes you really see people wrestling with there are a lot of things I want, I'm not quite sure how to balance them or what to prioritize. It's interesting, and it makes an impression on me.
Right. And so there's so many students graduating right now out of college, and with the COVID-19 pandemic, it's becoming increasingly difficult to find jobs. So how do you see career mobility playing out after the pandemic, and when do you think jobs will eventually fully return?
With the COVID pandemic, I've given up making predictions about tomorrow, let alone years into the future. Who knows? It's been a really interesting, very depressing, but a very weird economic situation in that it's not been, so I'm old enough to remember 2008 and 2001, and then just kind of uniformly everything crashes and it's hard to get a job in anything. What we seem to have seen over the last year is some industries booming, like tech's going gangbusters. Logistics is doing very well. Other industries cratering, so restaurants, airlines, gyms, things like that. Sorry. And so that it's less clear how that, it's so sector to sector. So clearly, if you're trying to enter some sectors, you're in a lot of trouble. There was an article in the Times, I think, a few days ago about, all these people who really thought they were going to get jobs in the oil industry, and the oil industry is in terrible trouble. But if what you always wanted was a job in the tech industry, it's not clear it's so bad. I think what's going to be interesting is kind of the process of reallocation across those. So how long does it take for people to move to one industry, from one industry to another? And what does it mean if I'm trying to, sorry, everything's going off at the moment. That's the printer. Tried to print something earlier, and it's putting out about one page every half hour, which I don't think is what it was designed to do. But we'll see about that. Yes, I guess one interesting question is, so got a lot of smart people who entered the oil industry 3 years ago. Now that's no longer viable, and they're looking to move into some of the industries that are growing faster around kind of tech and stuff. If I'm coming out as a new graduate, how am I going to be more attractive or less attractive than them? I think historically, often companies just go to the new graduates. So it's going to be, my sense is compared to graduating 2009, 2010, it's not going to be nearly so bad, because I think there are a lot of sectors that are still doing reasonably well. Yeah, for those people who've just started work, it's been a very strange introduction to the workforce. It's like, congratulations to our company, just stay in your bedroom. So it'll be interesting to understand how that affects kind of the way they think about work and, they learn and that sort of thing. But yeah, the labor market is such a mixed bag at the moment. I find it hard to make intelligent predictions about it.
Yeah. The last question that we were going to end off on was, what advice would you give to the current generation of students that would like to start the process of making an impact on society, maybe being an entrepreneur, maybe going into finance, statistics, and how would you recommend that they start this process?
I think be open-minded. I think there is a sense that people start off idealistic and get less idealistic as time goes by. Maybe I think as they start to encounter the tensions in the real world, the conflicts and dilemmas between this is the idealistic thing to do, but I need to feed my family. And, I think often there's this pushing it off. I want to change the world, but maybe I'll make my first million first. Okay, I've got my first million, but other guy has 10 million. I want 10 million. When I've made 10 million, I'm going to change the world. And there can be this kind of indefinite putting it off. I think it's very hard. I think you need to, it's just platitudes, figure out what's important to you, stay true to yourself, yada, yada, yada. I think it's a truism that we are too focused on material rewards, and would be happier if we downplayed that. But the fact that we remain so focused on them means there's probably something, I suspect I guess my take is a lot of us don't care that much about material rewards, but we care a tremendous amount about status. And I think the real challenge that a lot of people have is, can I change the world and have impact on the world without giving up my status in society in terms of, and that status is partly dependent on being able to live in the right places, send my kids to the right schools, and all of those sorts of things. So I think these are really, really tricky questions that, it would be great to have a glib answer to. Don't worry about it, change the world, everything will be fine. But, generation after generation wrestles with them. I guess I would also say it's great to want to change the world through what we do. I think if you really want to change the world, look to politics. That I think there's a Silicon Valley-esque, we don't need to worry about that. Companies will change the world. People getting rich is great for them. It doesn't necessarily change the world in ways that we would like. And I think there is a role for, the big, big challenges that we face around inequality, particularly around the environment and climate change. They're not going to be changed by companies. Ultimately, they require collective solutions, and they require some sort of political responses. So I guess I would say, for those who really want to change the world, I think we like to believe that by being a social entrepreneur, maybe I can change the world and get rich at the same time. But I think don't shortchange politics, because ultimately that is how real societal change gets driven.
Definitely. Yeah. That's something I'll definitely keep in mind. But thank you for letting us interview today. It was an honor and a privilege